Hi guys, I'm going about this video in a very peculiar old-fashioned way. I'm videoing my screen rather than through my device. Anyway, we're looking here at some Chinese work. It's from the 14th century and the Dutch and later English were influenced by this aesthetic. Now what we're trying to get here is a sense that artists are referring to artwork of the past and there's a kind of baton being passed down. So if we have a good look at this aesthetic style, read the text and then jump over to this piece, read the text again. This is a modern interpretation from 2013 of this baton that's been passed between these artists. Now what we're actually going to do is we're going to develop a floral image. Floral imagery is relatively straightforward. We're going to look at some diagrammatic information because this is going to help us structure our floral elements. I'd like you to do an analysis. You'll need a printout of this with the tracing paper over the top, an analysis of each of these Delft tiles. If you look closely, the information at the bottom is telling you what I'd like you to do. Really try and look at how they've been arranged, any additional elements that have been put into them, anything at all that might influence your work. And finally, a really odd and eclectic set of reference elements. There's some butterflies, a barnacle from Manchester Museum. These are from outside of the Science and Industry in Manchester, and some scissors. What I'm trying to get you to do here is look at a range of different things that aren't necessarily floral to influence your design. Right, so what I'm going to suggest is you have a piece of tracing paper and a smallish piece of paper, about A5 would be a good size. And what you're going to do is you're going to start designing and taking elements from other sources. So I've shown you already on my screen that I've got butterflies and barnacles and all kinds of things. I'm going to just grab my tracing paper and I'm going to take a section of a butterfly's wing. You see what I've just done? I've taken one little area from the butterfly wing. Now we're going to go back on the slides. Right, so what I have here is the sheet that's got the flower structure on it. The bits that interest me are this section here, the receptacle area, and the fact there's petals, the sepals, these little leaf bits that cover the bud, and the stamens and the stigma, that kind of element I'd like to incorporate into the design. You can see those things over in the reference material. Now I'm using a range of sources, so I'm going to take a sheet of tracing paper because what I want to do is I want to invent from sources. So I'm going to go and take a section from the butterfly wing over here. I've got one element there from the butterfly wing, designed from there and taken from there. I might go and take another pattern. I'm looking around on this barnacle for an element that I might take. There we see, I've got another element there. I'm looking over on this machinery. So I'm taking elements that could work as part of the petal. I'm going to move this out of the way. Let me show you what I've got before me now. So I've got three elements. I'm going to fold this, so I'm going to create a centre line. And then I'm going to trace over those elements that I've already got into my design to create symmetry. You can see this construction of the flower. I'm not sure yet which way round I'm going to do this, but now I'm going to start opening up my ideas and designing and keeping it fairly symmetrical. I might look back at my reference material. Remember, I liked that receptacle area section on the flower. The stem will come down here. I did like those sepal bits. Those were the leaf bits that cover the bud, the green bits that cover the bud. I might incorporate some elements like that. Whilst they're symmetrical, it doesn't have to be completely symmetrical. So I can alter the pattern and shapes like the stamen and so on into here. So I'm inventing. I could put detail on, I could look back at the reference material and come up with some detail. So I've invented this flower structure, taking elements from other sources. There are leaves on these designs. I can incorporate a leaf. Now some of them might have more symmetry to them, like this one, but some of them are sort of folded over. So I might draw a centre line down a leaf, and then I'm going to draw one with spikes along the side of it, and I'm trying to create a degree of symmetry as I draw that leaf in. There are other decorative elements onto here. See these spirally pieces coming off there and those dots. I might add some elements like that into the design. I might not particularly like that. I might edit that and change that in a minute. Now you could use this as a reference to draw from, so you do not have to trace it onto the piece of paper. If you are going to trace it onto the piece of paper, because you may have drawn on both sides of the tracing, draw over the top of one side, be consistent. If you apply that then central into your piece of paper, remember we're working on a polygon, a regular polygon, you might position it at more of an angle. It's entirely up to you what you do. Obviously it's in reverse because I have transferred the image and I flipped it over. Now you could scribble over the back, but I use usually this part of my fingernail here, and I press very, very hard and it will transfer the image. I'm going to lift it up just enough. You can see the image is transferring. You can draw over it. You can get an acute amount of pressure by drawing very clearly over the line, but that takes a little bit longer. So I have a ghost of the image on the piece of paper below, and I can draw back into it with a pencil, or I could work in with pen. Now I'm just going to use a chunky pen. You could work as fine or undetailed as you want, and you might decide that you want to work in the true Delft blue colour. I'm actually going to convert mine to blue later. So I'm just going to do this reasonably quickly. I'm just drawing in, but going for a smooth line. I like to mix up the kind of scale of the pen that I'm working with. So if you see that I've now picked up a fine liner, and I'm working roughly symmetrical in my design. I'm adding thin and thick lines. See how that one tapers from wide at the base. And I'm making this up as I go along, but I can look back at my reference material for ideas. So I spent a few minutes. I've had a series of different pens on the case and got some thin and thick lines. You can go in and add some solid fill sections if you choose to. It doesn't all have to just be line work. Entirely up to you. So once you have your main drawing on the back, or if you're at school you can use the guillotine, it'll speed things up no end. Measure and divide it in half. So that was 8 centimeters, so it's measured into 4 and 12 into 6. And then I'm going to use some scissors, and I'm going to just cut across carefully. Remember, use the heel of the scissor and cut in one nice glide, not zigzaggy. Turn over your design. Firstly, arrange it as it should be. Now, what I propose you do is you take the first piece and move it diagonally across, the top piece and move it diagonally across or down. And so in each corner there's a section. If you look, this piece corresponds to that piece, this piece will correspond to this piece. And we are going to take those pieces together. So I turned it over, and a top tip, I'm using masking tape. I'm going to hold the pieces together with a small piece of tape, just anchor them. I'm going to do that at either end and anchor again. I managed to knock that off, so I'm going to just hold it up and stick it down. Now the next piece I'm going to anchor in position again. And I'm going to anchor the last piece in position, and then I'll go over it with tape to secure the whole thing. Oops. There we go. So it's completely anchored. Now, using my reference material, I could transfer another one of these motifs into the centre, or arrange it in an alternative way into the design, or I could draw freehand based upon my motif. So I've positioned the motif. I'm using the technique where I actually rub over the back of my fingernail to apply pressure to transfer the drawing. And you can see a ghost of the image below. I want it to be a variation of the previous motif. I don't want it to be exactly the same. So essentially I'm going to do a similar job to the job I did straight away, working into it with the different pens. So I've pretty much drawn it in. I'm just going to make a couple of modifications. So it's similar to, but not the same as the previous design. Now there are a few white spaces which you might think look appropriate for the Delft design, but I'm going to incorporate some of these like features into this space. I'm going to add one here. Thicken out the line. I might add some of those bits that I've previously used, elements like this. So where there are some very blank areas, I'm going in to fill out. Now, if you recall, when you looked at the reference material, there's some like little insects into there, butterflies and so on. So where I'm getting a largest space into the background, that's where I'm incorporating one of these new features. And there's a degree of variation in the elements I'm adding in. I think I probably need one up there too. I might add, I'm going to get a slightly thicker pen, that's running out. So I'm happy with the overall design. Now what I'm going to do is, if I was at school, I'd photocopy this, possibly in blue, and then I'll start the repeat. Because I'm not, I'm going to have to use the camera, I'm going to photograph it, and then I'm going to make it electronically. And finally, I took a photograph of the image. I've imported it into PowerPoint, and I've repeated. You can see that flower repeating 9 times, as there are 9 sections in a grid. Also, remember the original flower that I drawn that was on the corners? You can see that flower in construction as it's tiled together. I also took it into Photoshop, so I'd actually done some additional work. I looked back at my earlier slide where I got the scissors and I wanted to introduce a new graphic. So I've drawn those in. Notice I've not got them over the edge of the tile, it's all contained within the tile. This dotty pattern though does come to the edge of the tile, so I've measured 2 centimetres and 2 centimetres, knowing that that point would connect with this one. So in Photoshop I've repeated it in exactly the same way I did in PowerPoint, but I was able to edit it and do a little bit more work with it. So I've evened out the base colour, because in here you can see the variation on the tiles. I've evened out the base colour, and I've put blue, influenced by the Delft tiles, back into the flowers. Remember, I've drawn them in black previously. Now if we think back to influence, I'm just going to click through the slides, get us back to the start. So this Chinese work influenced what happened in the Netherlands and influenced what happened in England, and later has influenced what this artist has done here. What we're aiming to do is use sources and references, but create something original, exploring repeat pattern.